Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for those two introductions. Appreciate it very much. Very touching, very humbled, very honored, but it is wonderful to be here. I do appreciate this opportunity to say a bit. I also appreciated the two shining stars that are here. I also have 3 kids, and I think of them as shining stars as you think of your 3 too. The 2 things come to mind actually when you were introduced. One is recently I've taken to, because I visited Lahore Fort and went to the Sheesh Mahal, and at the end of the tour the guide puts up the phone and the light reflects off the mirrors and it looks like a million galaxies or something, and I've said to people that our shining stars at Forman, we want to be like the Sheesh Mahal, that you shine in every which way, and that's certainly what we tried to accomplish at Forman. I also thought of my daughter. We have 2 sons and a daughter, and this actually does relate to my story, like all of us. We have parents and sometimes we have children, and our daughter, I guess to some extent, followed me into humanitarian work, and she's been to places like Darfur, South Sudan, Yemen, Myanmar with the Rohingya refugees, places like that, and that's what she's, her life is different than mine, but I mean, it's amazing the kinds of things that she does. So I say that because when I wrote Some Far and Distant Place that was mentioned, one of the things about this is that there's a chapter on my parents. I don't know about the tradition in Pakistan, but when I wrote this quite a few years ago, yes, there was a tradition in the U.S. at least of memoirs of being what I call the poor, poor, pitiful me genre of memoir. Weren't my parents terrible to me? Wasn't I unfortunate to be dragged across halfway the world by my parents? Why couldn't I have a normal childhood? Why did they treat me like this or whatever? And that's just the parents. Some people will blame the school. Some people will blame the community. And my response to life was more about wonder and astonishment than anger and bitterness. And so I say that because I think of one's family, one's life, one's continuity as going back. And you to understand where you situate in that, you have to understand your parents and maybe your grandparents as well. So maybe to mention this one here, the title did come from me, Some Far and Distant Place. The Muslim Christian Encounters Through the Eyes of a Child, that was actually the publisher. And I think they wanted to link that. This was right after 9/11. And so I think the idea of Muslim Christian understanding was something that was important to them, so they requested to add that. The Some Far and Distant part, though, comes from my mother, because they were products of the Great Depression. The 1930s was when they had their childhood. And my father was one of 14. My mother was one of 8. That's 22, and you think of each of them, if they got married, that's 44 aunts and uncles. And in the South, American South, we have the expression cousins by the dozens, which I think could hold true in Pakistan as well, cousins by the dozens. And by the way, that situation has changed in the States now because it's much smaller families, and I think maybe it's changing in Pakistan as well. But I certainly grew up with cousins by the dozens. My father, perhaps more than my mother, was in a very difficult, father was essentially a tenant farmer and everything that came with the Depression. But the church for them was important. And my mother was a Sunday school class. This is an American tradition, but a Sunday school class. And the little children were called the sunbeams. Maybe that was an early thing about you're supposed to be the light of the world or something, but they were called the sunbeams. And they did get stories about the rest of the world, about the missionaries that were in different places. And so it was that sort of sunbeams that my mother, and maybe it was something to do with escaping part of her childhood and going to a different world. But basically, she determined quite young that she was going to spend her life in some far and distant place. So that's where the title comes from in that one. But I think that was a good observation in any case. I have written a few other things. I mentioned The Dust of Kandahar. That was more recent, and that was about my Afghan experience, which was very difficult. But I guess I forget who said, I am human, nothing about the human experience is alien to me. I think that was a way I experienced something of that, and life in its most difficult in many ways, partly for reasons that you mentioned. My academic work was about the migration from Pakistan to the Middle East. Oxford University Press basically, relatively early on, came to the understanding that things were changing, or it was a big thing in Pakistan. I mean, I think when I wrote this book, remittances were from Pakistan, from workers overseas, was something like $3 billion a year. Now they're $30 billion a year. And I think even in your personal stories, you'll have friends or relatives that have worked in the Middle East, worked elsewhere as well. But just the whole phenomenon of migration, labor migration, work migration is huge in the world today. I often say the last part of my career, I taught classes at my hometown university in international development and international relations. And in both those classes, my first lecture would say that the big events or the big challenges of the 21st century, one of them is water shortage, which is an issue for Pakistan. And the second is the movement of people. And we're now 25 years, a quarter through this 21st century. And I think that's very true that both of those are important issues. Another book is Mongolia and the United States, A Diplomatic History. This was fun. Mongolia was the unexpected chapter in my life. And when people ask me, I served in 10 countries as a diplomat. The countries that most meaningful, that I enjoyed the most or whatever, I would probably say Pakistan, because I have roots here, and I did serve in Pakistan as well, including after the earthquake. And that was a very difficult time, but natural disasters tend to draw people together. I think that did happen in Pakistan, actually, and I think it did happen with the international community, that the international community came together at a time like this. So it was fun to write a book on Mongolia. So sometimes I look back and I think, boy, when you have a busy life, how are you able to write books? But I guess I also have a wonderful wife who made this thing possible too, and it's been good. I mentioned my parents. Of course, this was my mother's book, and my father did the Sindhi language text. That became his second language, Sindhi, and this is basically an introduction course for English speakers, which still it was co-written with a colleague, and Daniel Brown is the son of Pauline Brown, who was the co-author, and he says actually that he gets requests for this book from members of the Sindhi diaspora that are now, as you may know, are spread all around the world. And so the second or third generation feel like they're losing touch with their country. They feel like they're losing touch with their language. And a book like this allows them to reconnect with their parents or their grandparents' culture. So in terms of the chapters, I'll try to go quickly because I know we want to bring up to the present day and answer some of or discuss some of the issues that were challenged first. But this book was written in my late 20s when Fiona and I were expecting our first child. And I basically, what I wanted to do was to I didn't want a missionary upbringing. I didn't want Pakistan. I didn't want my childhood story to be told or to be said by somebody else. I wanted to have my perspective. I know on any issue there's multiple perspectives, but I wanted my perspective to be one of those perspectives so that my children and maybe my grandchildren would have some glimpse into what made me who I was, just as I was interested in glimpses of what made my parents who they were, what made my grandparents what they were as well. So that kind of inspired it. And, as I do have I think the Pakistani American community now numbers at least 1 million. So a lot of people have made this journey in the other direction. But I venture to say that when it's true, sahi baat hai ki main Pakistan mein paida hua, main Miri mein paida hua, bachpan maine wahan padha. When I left Pakistan in 1975 as an 18-year-old to a country that was supposed to be mine, but I didn't really know, I think I probably experienced something of what a Pakistani student would, sort of lonely arriving on a big university campus and all the challenges that come with it. Some people in this room may have experienced that themselves if they studied overseas. But in any case, writing Some Far and Distant Place was an effort to put my first 18 years of my life in perspective, to show that they mattered, that they were meaningful. The book here actually rotates between 3 different places. One of them was Murray, the place where I was born, which starts off in that, as Nazia mentioned, starts off there. And, for me, if you can give your children some glimpse of the beauty of this world in the first years of your life, that's wonderful. And I felt like growing up in Murray gave me a firsthand look at the beauty of the Himalayas. It doesn't get better than that, quite honestly. And of course, Murray was a much smaller place in those days. But the first, if there's a triangle of things, one of them is Murray, where I actually spent most of the time because this was 9 months out of the year. It was a boarding school. The vacations, though, were spent in Sindh, and that opened up a window to a different part of Pakistan, to a more remote part of Pakistan, Upper Sindh. We had friends in the mission hospital in Quetta, and every winter we would go up and visit them. This was actually a Pakistani family. Fazaldin was the head of nursing there, and we became quite close to that family. And so that was part of my upbringing. Where my parents lived, Baratadero and Shikarpur, later Hyderabad. But Upper Sindh, of course, is the Mohenjo-daro and the heart of the Indus Valley civilization. So that was part of the childhood. And also the Sindhi, Sindh is interesting in a lot of ways, but as a kid I visited Saiwan Sharif. As a kid I visited Bit Shah. So that became part of the mosaic of my life as well, and that influence that maybe you mentioned too about some of the Sufi saints or whatever. And some of the remarkable encounters, narratives. I will say that my family was very much welcome. My mother, who this young lady in this picture is now 94 years old. My father passed away a couple of years ago, but they would have been, gratified by your remarks. But they made that life in Upper Sindh mostly, and Sindhi language and all that was part of it. So the second part of the story was rooted in Sindh, and then the third part of the story was rooted in what was ostensibly my homeland. In my first 18 years of my life, I was basically in the U.S. for grade 3 and grade 8. And so it gave me a fleeting connection to my extended family, all those cousins by the dozens. And it gave me a sort of initial introduction to the U.S., to the public school system in the U.S., to the issues. Of course, you think of the 60s, the first time around, 70, 71, the civil rights movement. I went to, maybe it sounds amazing, or maybe it sounds terrible, but when I was in 8th grade in 1970, that was the year they integrated the schools in Macon, Georgia. My parents were from the South. So I went to the formerly all African-American school. And, so I played the saxophone in the band. It was still largely African-American, but that too was another cultural bridge to cross, and one that I felt very fortunate to be able to do. I felt I was witnessing change in my country, and I wanted to be hopefully a positive part of it. So again, some far and distant place basically moves among those three worlds: Murray, Sindh, and the United States. Of course, a ton of stuff has happened since then. This was the opening chapter. I think every life is interesting, and I enjoy talking to people and finding their life story because I think it is actually true. But I guess if I were to go the 3 or 4 chapters, so 18, I go as a student. Northwestern University, didn't know a soul, looked a certain way, but my life experience was different. I think that you use the phrase dual identity. I think that's an experience that is increasingly common across the world. But in that day and time, perhaps people less attuned to that. There were fewer international students, so that experience, was different in different respects. But basically, I guess you'd say the 18 to 28 was the getting of education. Is that the word? I think there's an Australian novel called that. But basically, Northwestern University for 4 years, summer internship. I'm a big fan of internships. I don't know if anybody here has had them, but I love it when companies. My internship was at a think tank, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I was the intern for a retired ambassador who was doing a project on India-Pakistan relations, Christopher Van Hollen. Some of you may know his son, Christopher Van Hollen Jr., who was born at the SDA hospital in Karachi. His parents, unlike my parents, were diplomats. Now he's a senator from Maryland, very interesting guy. But it was a wonderful experience, and it sort of affirmed my interest in international affairs. So I go off to Tufts University, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I have the PhD program, which is essentially another 4 years, and a couple more interesting internships. But then I make the decision to join the Foreign Service. So I have a 32 career. That's the third chapter, I guess, as a Foreign Service officer. Felt very fortunate. My first assignment was back in Pakistan, which everybody was surprised because usually big bureaucracies don't do the right thing. Somebody would say that because the guy grew up in Pakistan. Pakistan was the last place we would send them. But the bureaucracy did work, and I had 4 interesting years. Now we're talking about 85 to 89 at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. And I guess the important thing for me was I started off my career in a country that I was already familiar with. It allowed me to reconnect with Pakistan. It allowed me to embark on what I think, I would consider to be a very satisfying, gratifying, and even successful career. That took me to 10 countries. The only place I never served in was Washington, D.C. I always thought of Washington, D.C. as the true hardship post. So it kept me away from the policy scene, I suppose, but I always felt of myself as, working in the trenches and being there. I guess the military calls it the tip of the spear or whatever. I don't necessarily like that, but it was basically being where the action is. And so 10 countries, a lot of India, Pakistan, Central Asia, Mongolia, Cambodia. I had 1 European assignment as the development counselor at the U.S. Embassy to the European Union in Brussels. And a couple other, Middle East as well, both in Yemen and in Jordan, and also South Africa during the waning days of apartheid. So as you mentioned, I mean, some of the big issues of those 30 years, in one way or the other, I was able to be a part of them. So that was important. I raised the 3 kids over there. My second son probably doesn't like it, but some of the families I met in Pakistan, military families, are interesting to me because the military families, they tend to serve in different parts of the country, so they have a countrywide perspective, which I think is really, really good, but it also means they move every 2 or 3 years, and so for the kids, that's sometimes difficult. Diplomatic families, even more so. They move every 2 or 3 years. They go to different places. The kids are ripped away from their school, but thank God, I guess our kids, largely had a good experience. And when my son applied to Georgia Tech, in the U.S., you have to write a college essay about, explaining your motivation, why you're going to university. I don't know if Forman requires that or not, come to think of it. I think more common these days is simply the scores, and, you reach a certain academic level and then you get admitted. And the U.S. system, at that time anyway, was you wrote an essay. And my second son started off his essay by saying, "I'm the luckiest kid in the world." And if you're a parent, you're going to be gratified by that, especially if you're a foreign service parent, who some kids resent the life you gave them, the uprooting of their friends every 2 or 3 years and everything that comes with that. So if your child can say, "I'm the luckiest kid in the world," that's very meaningful and very much appreciated. And I mentioned what our daughter's doing. I think all of our kids, and I will say, we were talking earlier about this author, C1, I guess, and it was, of course, about the survivor who's a Forman graduate of Zafar Masood, head of the Bank of Punjab, a Forman graduate. We were talking before we came, and this book was being mentioned because he has also spoken, and some of you may have heard his lecture. And one of the things he says is what flashes before your mind, in that what you think is going to be the last minute of your life are the things that truly matter in your life. And mostly they're about the people that you're close to. And it kind of gives an indication of what should be your priority. In some ways, you're lucky to get a second chance, as he got. And you mentioned the experience in Afghanistan. I feel I got that chance as well because several people were killed around me. And, you do have a certain amount of survival guilt, but you also have that focus a minute or two. And believe me, or maybe I should say, believe me, if you're lucky, your last moments of your life, or what you think are the last moments of your life, are truly spent thinking about those that are closest to you. So I think if there's no other lesson from here, that's one of them. But I have been fortunate. I had that first chapter of my life in Pakistan, which in many ways, even all these years later, is the most vivid chapter. And then I had the 10 years of the getting of, I guess it's called the getting of wisdom, which is the education part. And then I have the 32 years as a foreign service officer in those different countries, which is very satisfying and very fulfilling career in so many ways. And then I retire, Inauguration Day 2017. You guys can do the math. But Inauguration Day 2017, I retire, and our kids are growing up by then, and we want to share in something of their early life. They're in their 20s now. And so I teach, and I mentioned before the satisfaction of teaching. And then I get the call to come back to Forman. The call meaning from Dr. Tebby, would you consider applying for this position? You have a background in Pakistan. You've had a career that's taken you to some interesting places. Would you consider it? My first response was, no, I'm just not ready for that. I need a break. I need a break from what happened in Afghanistan. I need a break from a lot of things. But a year later, they were still searching. And so this time I said I'd be willing to. And it's very satisfying. I'm very grateful. My colleagues that are here, and I appreciate my colleagues that have come from FCCU, it's education is one of the most fulfilling sectors to be in for all kinds of reasons. And so for me to have this last chapter of my professional career back in the country where I was born, in an educational setting, in an institution that I'm enormously proud of, it all comes together in a positive way. And again, sort of adds to the feeling that, that I'm incredibly fortunate, or as my second son might say, I'm the luckiest kid in the world. Maybe I'm the luckiest adult in the world. But it is, I do feel very fortunate. And, so it's wonderful to be here. I guess we can talk separately about some of the reasons later. I use the image of, Forman wants to be the Sheesh Mahal of Pakistan. Yeah. We want to have lots of shining stars, and we do. I mean, it's wonderful that you're a Forman Knight graduate. I appreciate your family's connections. But wherever I go in Pakistan, actually, I do meet people that make me think, we are a Sheesh Mahal. So that part is very fortunate. The other image, and this was not one that came from me, but it was one that one of our speakers, I don't know, maybe Dr. Fatah might have been at the literary festival we recently had, but somebody used the image of the coat of many colors. And of course, that's Prophet Yusuf, that's Joseph, coat of many colors. And it came to my mind that, that's what Forman wants to be, is a coat of many colors, because we want to have a campus, that looks like Pakistan. And we mentioned that we do. We have diversity, not necessarily in the way that it's talked about in the West, but we have diversity certainly in terms of faith communities. We have diversity in terms of geographic origins. We have, because of our scholarship programs, we have diversity in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds. And so what it means is we do have students from the Sikh community. The first Sikh officer in the Pakistan Army was a Forman graduate. Jamshed Marker, an amazing diplomat, and some people may recall his work with the UN. I think he was Pakistan's ambassador, high commissioner to something like 15 countries. Jamshed Marker from the was an old Formanite from the Parsi community. He was also, as I mentioned, a Forman graduate, and he gifted his library of 3,000 books to our Center of Public Policy and Governance. And on it goes. Dr. Noel Coker, who will be returning to Forman as head of our CPPG with the retirement of Dr. Shafkat, of course, was, I think, 3-star general, highest ranking from the Christian community, and on and going, all the communities in Pakistan. And, we want to be a place where everybody's welcome. It's certainly absolutely fine for people to have a diverse range, in terms of diversity, to have a diverse range of opinion, and maybe even strongly disagree on some issues, but still be able to talk to each other with honor and respect. And I think that's part of, that's part of what we're about as well. So, appreciate that aspect of Forman. I think it's an important dimension. And especially in this world right now, I was trying to think, and of course, you know what I'm referring to. The world is in a difficult place. The world is in a dismal place. The world is maybe even a pitiful place right now. We can't, it's hard to imagine some of the things, how you work your way through. I suppose we could adopt Voltaire's statement, which is, everybody cultivates their own garden. And I guess at some level, I think of Forman as the garden that I'm trying to cultivate right now. And that's a place where all of us, because we're a community, can make a difference. And maybe that's part of it. This is the CEOs. I'm trying to think of, lessons for the future. And I think that that's part of it. The things that we're responsible for, we should do the best we can and try to make a difference there. And, again, I realize that the world is a difficult place. As a diplomat, I will still always go for diplomatic solutions. I've been to one audience later recently that basically said, forget get the diplomats. That can't work. They're woefully ineffective. I will say there was one recent example where it seemed to work, and that was the 4-day conflict between Pakistan and India. And all I can say is, thank goodness it's not a 40-day conflict or even a 400-day conflict, because that would have been disaster. So I don't give up on diplomacy ever. I do think that it can make a difference, and my colleagues at Forman have heard me say that even in seemingly hopeless situations, I'll find hope wherever I can. I'll look for hope wherever I can find it, and oftentimes, even in those very bleak situations, it is possible to extract a measure of hope and not give up. I mean, I think that's one of the other things is just don't give up, despite what you see around you, and so try to fulfill those things as well. There's other things that may come out in the conversation in terms of, what I see from higher education, what I see from life. I do think that the ethical backdrop for what one does is important, that I think people need a ethical compass. And I think that one of the issues we have right now in the world is that a lot of ethical compasses have gone totally haywire. And sometimes you wonder, in the American South, they have an expression, something like, didn't those parents teach them anything? Because oftentimes it's the home where we first get the ethical compass. And, I think that that's vital as well. Again, we can talk about lots of things. I don't want to, indulge people and take all this time. But I hope that's a little bit of a reflection on my journey, which right now is an extremely fulfilling chapter of my life. It's been 5 years now at Forman, and it's, because of my life as a diplomat, I traveled a lot. This is actually a kind of stability I haven't had for a while. So I appreciate very much that I have the stability at Forman, and very much appreciate being part of the Forman community. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know what comes next in the program, but I guess at some point there may be a question and answer time or be asked questions. But thank you for coming to this event. So.